Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Welcome back to Google Developers Live. I'm Eric Gilmore, a technical writer with the Google Drive Developers Relation Team. And here with me today is Claudio Carabino, an engineer with the same team. And a fine engineer, I might add. Recently, he's done quite a bit of work writing some new code samples that we're featuring in our public documentation. And we'd like to talk about one of those today in detail.
Thanks, Eric. So we recently, probably the beginning of this week, we added a new page to our docs. It's a quick start page on developers.google.com/drive/quickstart, which will help you get started with the Drive API in, we think, about 10 minutes. So you start from nothing, and you end up with a complete command line application in one of the languages we support, which are Java, Python, PHP, .NET, and Ruby. And this application will perform authorization for you and upload a file to Google Drive. We've done another Google Developers Live event last week covering something like this with Python. So if you want to learn about this in Python, there is a video in our library that you can watch. Today, we're going to do the same thing by following these instructions, but in PHP. So we have a list of videos we can point them to, right?
Sure. There's a Drive YouTube playlist with all of our recent videos, as well as some videos from Google I/O that you could view, webinar by one of our developer advocates. So please look at the playlist and check it out. But specifically, if you're looking for the Python Quick Start, it's described there. It's also described in this page. This page covers all of those languages. As Claudio said, today we're going to focus on PHP, but all languages are covered here.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, whatever the language of your choice, when you want to write this command line application, there are 5 steps you have to follow. They're outlined in the docs in this page we have in front of us. So the first step is to enable the Drive API. Then we're going to install the Google Client Library for the programming language that we chose, and set up the sample, run the sample, and if you like that and you want to do more, there's some suggestions on what to do next.
In case you were wondering, Claudio writes the samples, then I write this page, and then we argue about things in order to give you this final polished product that you're looking at.
Yes, and it is polished, but maybe there's still some issues or still something that is not clear. And if you have comments or feedback on this page, please reach out to us on Google+. Or remember, we monitor Stack Overflow for Google Drive SDK questions. So if you have technical questions, please post them on Stack Overflow, and we'll be glad to answer to those questions.
If you're looking for very, very quick gratification, though, there's also a feedback link right on this page we're looking at.
That's absolutely correct. Let's see how we're going to write command line application in PHP. The first step is enabling the Drive API. We need to create a Google API project in the Google APIs console, and then enable the services we need and generate the credentials we need. Let's do this step by step. So I open the Google APIs console. I have no projects. This is the first time I create a new project, which is probably what you will see if this is the first time you try writing a Google API project. And I have this big button that says Create Project. And this is what I'm going to click. So when I do, I go to this page where I see the list of services that I can enable and disable for my application. So in our sample, we need to enable the Drive API service. But if you need to use the Drive API and other services, let's say the Calendar API, you can enable both from here. You can enable as many APIs as you need from here. So I'll scroll down, find Drive API, and enable it by clicking on the on-off switch. I also see that I have a limit of 500,000 requests per day. This should be enough for our sample today.
That's a generous quota.
Yeah, it is. I enabled my service. I need to generate my credentials. The Drive API uses auth2 as the authorization mechanism. And in order for the auth flow to run, you need client ID and client secret.
Do all requests to the API need to be authorized? Is that still true?
So there are some cases where you may want to publish a document to the general public, and so you want anyone without any credentials to be able to access that. It's let's say it's a special case, but in general, almost all API calls require authentication.
Right.
So I said I want to create my new credentials, auth2 credentials. So I click on API access in the left navigation menu, and I have no credentials, so I have to create an auth 2.0 client ID. It's a step-by-step process. I need to specify a product name. This can be the name of a product. I'm going to say Drive PHP. Maybe you're going to choose something that is more descriptive. And if you have a product logo, you can add it here. You may add it later if you're just testing now, and then when you're ready to launch your product, you may want to add a logo and description and a lot of other things. But at this time, we don't need a logo. So let's click on Next. And then we have to choose if we want our application to be a web application, a service account application, or an installed application. Usually, you're probably going to select a web application. But today, we're going to write a command line application, which is an installed application. It's called an installed application.
And this is because our goal was to get started quickly.
Yes. So we will see at the end of this talk that the user experience for a command line application is not great. User experience when you have a web application is much nicer. But for the sake of example, this is probably a better way to get started. And all we say about the Drive API usage is going to be the same. And then you have to build an application on top of it. But all you learn from here can be used in a web application.
That's right.
So let's say installed application, and then this is not Android, this is not iOS, it's other, which is a command line application running on my computer. I click on Create Client ID, and what I get is a new box titled Client ID for Installed Applications, which includes Client ID and Client Secret. The client secret, as the name says, must be secret. So you should make sure that you never share this client secret with anyone.
For instance, not on the public internet on a video.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. So let's say you're not smart, so like me, and you showed your client secret on a public video, and you don't want other people to use your credentials. What you do? At the end of this talk, you go back to the API's console, click on the Reset Client Secret, and this current client secret will be revoked, so no longer valid, and you get a new one that you can use in your application. The client ID will stay the same, so you only need to replace the client secret. You can consider client ID and client secret as username and password. You might want your username to be known, but you never want your password to be known to other people.
Right.
So with this, we go back to the docs and see that we've done the first step, enable a Drive API. We can move on to the second step, which is installing the client library for the language of your choice. I selected Python for today, and to install PHP, sorry. I selected PHP for today. I selected Python last week.
That's right.
This is what I was trying to say. And for PHP, the instructions are very easy. There's just a one-line command that we can run to check out the source from the public repository. So I can take this line.
In Python's defense, its setup is easy too.
Yeah, it's still a one line. So I can take that line and run it on my command line. So, and what I get is the source for the Google API client library for PHP. And if I go to the folder, I see that I have a Google API PHP client folder, which contains what we just got, and then two more files. We're going to see right now what they're for.
Incidentally, the PHP client recently underwent a significant refactoring. So you might see some improvements there. If you have an older copy, you might want to upgrade that copy.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And we posted these news in our changelog. So remember, every time we add something on the docs or the libraries or anything that is related to the Drive SDK, we update the release notes in our documentation. So this was just added a couple of days ago.
Yes.
OK, let's go back to the docs and see what we have to do next. So we've done step 2, install the Google Client Library. It's time to do step 3, set up the sample. To run this sample, we need two files. The source file in PHP and the document to be uploaded into Google Drive. I created the text document, so I called it document.txt, and it's a text document with some sample content, friendly sample content. This is the file we're going to upload to Google Drive. And then I also have a drive.php file, which is empty. So if you want to get started quickly, you can just go to this page, take this code, and copy it into your file. And then we will try it, and then I will explain line by line what's happening on your computer. Right. So let me copy that into my file. Oops. Let's make this bigger. So let's see these lines.
Let's have a look at this.
First, we require the Google Client Library. And the Google Client Library is in Google API PHP client /source. We just downloaded it. So if you downloaded it as we did, this is going to be exactly the correct path. Next, we have to set our credentials from the API's console. So the sample code obviously will have some placeholders. And you have to replace your client ID or your client secret with the values you got from the API's console. So I'm going to do that. Let me go back to the API's console. I can take my client ID and copy it here. And then I can do the same with my client secret and put it there. And this is the only edit you need to do to get started. If you want to add new features, then of course, you have to write them. But if you want to get started, that's the only thing you have to do. Everything else is already working. I would say before we go and explain line by line, should we run this and see what happens?
Absolutely.
OK.
Can I ask one question, though, first?
Sure.
The redirect URI that's given there, is that a standard URI for installed applications?
Yes. So this is a standard URI that is used for installed applications. When you have a web application, you have to specify your own. But with installed applications, this is going to be the standard value. It's provided by, if you see in the API's console, you will find the same redirect URI. And you don't need to change it if you use installed applications. Okay. And well, I mean, while we're talking here, we're talking about the scopes. The auth scopes are are basically what we're asking the user for, what permissions we want. And in our case, we're asking for the full drive permission. So with this sample, we're asking to have access to all the documents for the user who runs the sample. There are different scopes. Even just for the Drive API, there are different scopes you can use, so you don't need to ask for the full Drive access.
No,
we actually don't recommend it.
Exactly. Our general recommendation is to ask for the most specific, limited scope that you can request and still have your application work.
Yeah, but this is sample, and of course you can tweak that. So let me run this. I go back to my terminal. If I just do PHP. And my file is called drive.php, so I'm running it from the command line. The first thing the application does, it says, please visit this URL. So the auth flow requires the user to grant access to the application from a browser. But a command line application has no browser. So what it can do is that it shows you the URL to visit and then waits for you to do something. So this is what I was referring to when I said the user experience is not the greatest. The user in a command line application has to copy the link, go to his browser, visit that page, and will find the famous auth2flow dialog, which says that the Drive PHP, which is the application I just created, is requesting permission to view and manage the files and documents in my Google Drive. And if I want to know more details, I can expand it and see more details. I know this application, so I'm going to allow access to it. And what I get, since this is an installed application, is that I get back a code that I have to copy and paste into the command line. Once I enter this code, the application will be authorized. And the next thing it will try to do is upload that file to Drive and then print all the metadata we get back from Drive. So I insert my authorization code, and I get a lot of things. It's a JSON structure that is exactly what we get back from Drive. Of course, this is an example, so you probably don't want to just dump everything you get back from the API to the console. You probably want to do something else. But still, this is useful for you to learn what you can see, what you get from the Drive API. So we uploaded a file, and we get his ID here. We get a link to it. We get some other links to it. We can talk about it. We get a title, what type the document is, the description, and so on. A lot of flags, a lot of labels the document has, everything you might need about this document.
I think for the purposes of our sample, it's interesting to note that the title is what you'll look for when you go to the Drive UI.
Yes,
not
and
the file name.
Let's check it out. So if I go to my Google Drive, a document called My Document, we'll see why this document is called My Document, but a document called My Document has just been uploaded. And if I open it, it's just a text file, so the Google viewer will be able to open it and will just show the content and say, hi, I'm a test document. So it worked. Hi. Let's see how that worked. Let's go back to the code. So if you remember, the first thing we did was to show the user an authorization URL. This is done by using the client library. You don't have to do much to do it. You just ask the client, which is the one we set our credentials to, and say, client, create authorization URL. And then we take this authorization URL and send it to the user and ask them to visit this URL. Once the user inserts the authorization code, we store it in another variable called authorization code. We ask the client library to perform the authorization flow and authenticate with this code. And once that is done, we get an access token, which is what you need to send requests. So I'm not going into details about the auth2 flow, but when you perform authorization, you get two types of tokens: refresh tokens and access tokens. Access tokens are short-lived and are needed to send requests, authorized requests. Refresh tokens shouldn't be sent with your request, but can be used to regenerate new access tokens when you need them. So we have good documentation about it. I'm not going to explain it here. If you want to know more, there's a good page for it. So that's everything we need to do authorization. Now our client has a valid access token, can send requests. So what we want to do next is to insert a file. To insert a file, we have to specify the metadata, such as the title, description, and MIME type, and the contents of the file we want to upload. So in our case, this sample hard codes some of those values. That's why, so for instance, we set the title to always be my document and this line. That means that wherever a document is in Google Drive, this is going to be called my document. Of course, when you write your real application, you want this title to be a more descriptive one. So for instance, you can take the file name from the file you're uploading and using that, or any other thing that makes the file unique. Then you can add a description, which is, in our case, hard-coded, but of course, you should provide a better description. And we also specify a MIME type. So this sample application always uploads text files, so we are coded that. But remember, you might want to upload images or any other kinds of files. And in that case, the MIME type should match what your file is.
If you're like me, after you run this sample for the first time, you'll go back, change some of these hard-coded values just to make sure that it's actually running.
OK. Yeah.
You don't have to do that, but
yeah, you only do that if you don't trust me, and it doesn't.
Well, fortunately, it worked.
Yeah. Whoa. So I said we need metadata, but we also need the file content, which is the string, hi, I'm a text document. And we do that by using a PHP method, file get contents, which reads a document, a file, into a string. So data will contain all our content, whatever the content is. And then we actually send the request, which is a one line. We have the service class, which is a Drive service. it has a list of resources, including files, which is what we want. And for each resource, we have methods. And for instance, files has insert, which is used to create a new file. And to insert, you pass the file, which is the metadata we just created, and the rest of the data, such as the content and the MIME type. That's it. When you send that request, the variable created file will contain the response from the API, which is an object or a JSON structure in our case. And as you remember, we just dumped this content to the command line. And that's what the last line does. Easy, isn't it? And with that, we can go back to the docs and see that we've done step 3 and step 4. So set up the sample and run the sample. All it takes now is for you to make this better. So the sample works, it uploads a file, but there might be other things you want to do. For instance,
you might want to list files.
List files, for instance.
Sure.
If you want to do that, it's very easy. I'm not going to do it now, but remember we had a call service files insert. There is another call which is service files list. Or if you want to get a specific file, you have service files get, and so on. All the other requests you can do are documented in our reference guide. So you can see that you can manage files, you can manage permissions, you can manage revisions, and so on. But probably one of the other things you might want to do is build a web application. And perhaps integrate your application with the Drive UI. So the users can click on a file from Drive and land into your application. All of this is supported, and all of this can be done with the Drive SDK. We have documentation for it, and if you start from this quick start page, at the end you will see links to all these things we mentioned, so that you can go directly there and make your application better.
Sure. And if you've got a lot of energy and courage, you could also go and review the authorization documentation. I'm not going to lie and tell you that it's easy, but it is interesting, and we have a link to that as well.
Definitely, it is not the easiest part, but because it has to be secure.
Yes.
So we have to, this is a security standard, auth is a standard. We have to make sure that, of course, your credentials are not stolen, that you are who you are, and you're allowed to do what you want to do. The good thing is that the libraries do all the heavy lifting for you. So I don't really have to know how the auth flow works if I use the library. As you have seen, I have a couple of instructions to run, and that's it. So it is definitely interesting to know, and you should know about auth to handle all the edge cases, all the spatial cases, and so on. But to get started, you can start without that.
Sure.
Before we wrap up, I will just say that this is a first sample, but we have more complex samples in our docs. So with this page allows you to get started in 5 minutes. But if you want to write a real web application that does a lot more, we have a section on example application. Those are complete sample applications in the same file languages. So we have Java, Python, PHP, .NET, and Ruby. And these applications show how you can build a complete web app that integrates with the Drive UI, that manages authentication and all the edge cases, and basically everything. So let's say you want to do PHP, because today we're talking about PHP. We have this application called Dr. Edit or Dreadit, we still haven't decided, which is a text editor for Google Drive. It's obviously, it's a longer document. There are more steps to get started, but you can learn about it step by step, and you can also download the source so that you can try it on your computer. I would definitely recommend you to check this out.
Absolutely.
Cool. And with that, I think we should wrap up for today. I hope this was useful, and if you have questions, please reach out to us as soon as possible.
Right. Just to remind you, the feedback link in the documentation should get you a quick response to anything that you find in the documentation that you'd like to comment on. And Stack Overflow is constantly monitored by our engineers as well.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you, and see you next time.